Like this, smiling naturally. Ha. Okay, well, hi everybody. I'm Jenna Blum. Welcome to A Mighty Blaze. I'm one of the co-founders of The Blaze, and today I am so happy to have as our special Friday frontliner, Claire Lombardo. Welcome to The Blaze, Claire.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
We're so excited to have you. Before we get started and I start asking Claire all sorts of nosy and obnoxious questions, I give you a quick commercial for The Blaze. If you are a repeat Blazer, welcome back. Thank you for bringing your party to The Blaze. And if you're new here, please know that we are a team of 30-odd professional volunteers, not that we're odd, although we probably are, because we're all practicing writers and creatives who are dedicated to connecting readers with writers in the age of COVID. That's when we started, and now far beyond COVID, so that you can still see your favorite authors and new authors in your living room without even having to put on pants, a gift that the pandemic gave us. If you like what you see here, please give us a like or a follow on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, which I refuse to call X, on Instagram. We are ubiquitous. And please consider signing up for our newsletter at www.mightyblaze.com so you never have literary FOMO ever again. No more FOMO. Nobody likes that. And again, today I am joined by Claire Lombardo. Her book, Same as It Ever Was. Cue the talking head song here. You're just lucky I'm not singing it, although it has been in my head ever since I received the book. Is a runaway bestseller, one of the smash hits of the summer. I'm sure you guys have seen this book everywhere, heard people talk about this book everywhere. We're going to chat about it, but first I'm going to read Claire's bio. You ready for your official bio?
Sure. Yeah.
Great. Buckle up. It's you. All right. Claire's debut novel, The Most Fun We Ever Had, was an instant New York Times bestseller, which happens to everybody, like never. A Reese Book Club pick and was longlisted for the Women's Prize in Fiction. Claire is a graduate of the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her short fiction has appeared in, among others, Playboy, Barrel House Magazine, Little Fiction, and Long Form. She has taught fiction at the Iowa Writers Workshop and Grinnell College and currently works, I think this is right, you're still at Prairie Lights.
I sure am, yeah.
I love that. I have questions about that.
Oh, great.
Yeah, good, because I love Prairie Lights, and every author who's had the great privilege of coming through Prairie Lights on tour or just going through Iowa is just like, what a magic store.
It is,
yeah. In Iowa. She's not commuting from like Wisconsin to work at Prairie Lights. And she lives with her dog, Renee. And I would like to see Renee, please, if that is even possible.
It is possible. I have to go get her. It'll take me like a second and a half.
Okay. So like the things we should have done in the green room, but I seriously want to see Renee. So we're all big dog fans here, please. Oh my God, so cute. Oh my God.
Yeah, my buddy. She gets really mad when she doesn't like, thank you so much.
I'm not camera ready. I don't have my hair done, but she does. She's beautiful. How old is she?
She's about, thank you, buddy. I'm really sorry about that. She's about 7. She's a rescue. So, but she's going to live forever, in my opinion. So her age is irrelevant.
It's moot, right? I know.
Yes, exactly.
Who has like a little white goatee now, and he's 4. And I'm like, why are you getting
Renee?
You're 4? Like, that's not cool. You have to remain like perfectly pristine young forever and ever.
Yeah. Do people say really rude things to him about his age? Renee, people are always seeing Renee and being like, oh, she's an old lady. And I'm like, no, she's not.
Yeah.
She just has some white.
About my former dog. They'd be like, oh, he's an old dude, isn't he? And I'm like, well, so are you.
Right. What's wrong with that? Yeah.
I kept always wanting to quote the thing from Alice in Wonderland about how it's rude to make personal remarks when people would say that about my dog. I'm like, I would tell you, you're like, limping.
Right.
Beautiful, just as she is. And I should mention, too, that while we're talking about Same as It Ever Was, the New York Times said, it's a brave and nuanced book, lulling us with its rhythms and taking risks when we glance away. So I'm really excited to talk about this book. Not that anything will eclipse Renee, but we'll try. So my first question for you, Claire, and again, welcome, is can you just tell us what the book is about in your own words? Like, give us the elevator pitch.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to describe Same as It Ever Was as a woman's life story told out of order.
Interesting.
So it's about a woman named Julia Ames when we meet her at the beginning of the novel, she is in her 50s. She is married to a man who she really likes, who really likes her back. She has 2 kids who are mostly grown and doing well. She has a tiny black dog named Suzanne, who is not remotely based on my dog at all.
Actually, there is no similarity from what
no, none whatsoever.
I'd get away from me, and Suzanne would be like, "Oh my god!"
Yeah. But she has a pretty nice life. She lives in an unnamed Chicago suburb. And then she goes to the grocery store one day and runs into an old friend who she both never expected to see again and actively hoped to never see again. And that causes her to start re-examining her life, reflect on her life, I guess. And we get to know her at various phases of her life, from her early childhood into the future, actually. Yeah.
I think it's also pretty saucy, this book too. Like there's a lot of it's right in my alley in terms of what I like to read and also what I like to write, because I like to think about the secret landscapes of characters. And I think the way you just described the book is very beautiful and also sounds a little bit like Stone Diaries, where it's like, or David Copperfield, like I was born and then I lived and I was a woman and I died. But there's like a lot going on too, the sort of nexus of Julia's various lives, like her 30-something life, her 50-something life, and then her childhood. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about kind of like this secret landscape that the reader is privy to and that the other characters are not, without spoilers.
No, that's a great question. I mean, this is a very interior book, I would say. You're pressed right up against Julia for the entirety of the novel. Claustrophobically, sometimes, I would argue, as the person who has spent years writing it. She's a lot. She's a character who has a lot of neuroses. She has a lot going on in her head, and you as the reader are privy to all of that. And so you kind of get, that is my lifeblood as a fiction writer too. I love getting into kind of the minutia of people's lives. And so I get in trouble for saying that this book isn't plotty, because there's not a murder. There's not, a big sort of plotty element, but there's tons of plot. There's tons of like little kind of the just daily life stuff that I love and I salivate over as a writer and as a reader. So yeah, we really just get maybe more about Julia than we want sometimes. But
I don't think that, and I don't think one of the things that we used to say in writing workshop, like a sort of an insult, was that a book was too thinky. It was like too interior, then it was too thinky as opposed to plotty. But I didn't feel like this was too thinky as opposed to plotty, because the striations of thought and description and action were very well apportioned. I thought, like, things are happening. Like Julia's, she meets this woman from her past. Ooh, cute organ music. There's stuff that has gone on there. Like, what would you say maybe are sort of the two or three like really big subjects that this book takes on that makes it so easy for us to hook into this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I would say the biggest ones for me are, I'll say maternal ambivalence, but I don't think Julia isn't necessarily ambivalent about motherhood, nor is her own mother, but there are that's one of the sort of big questions explored is, the roles that we're quote unquote supposed to play as women and how we feel about those things and how the way that we feel about those things defines us in the eyes of society. So that would be one. Intergenerational friendship is another big element in this novel. Yeah, and it's what started this novel for me. Julia is friends with the woman you mentioned that she runs into at the grocery store, Helen, who is about 25-ish years older than her. And Julia kind of becomes entranced by her. And then what else? I would just say identity, I guess, female identity, or just a full stop identity. Julia is a person who has never felt terribly at home in the world. She's never moved too easily through the world. And so that is one of the big hearts. What can a book have multiple hearts, I guess? For me is just this woman who has trouble moving through the world and is just trying to kind of figure out how to do that. So I would say those are three of the big ones for me.
Yeah, that's great, because I was thinking about this sort of various themes and sub-themes, or like, you know, if music has like a harmonic and then it has like a sort of a minor harmonic. I was like, what are what's the major theme and what's the minor theme? You can see I also like went to grad school. We're going to talk about theme today.
Please.
Right. But I was thinking about, I'm glad to know I kind of got it right as far as the author is concerned, because I think motherhood and what it signifies in a woman's life in terms of her own identity is such a strong chord that's being played here. But there was also the friendship with Helen, which kind of redirects Julia into a more traditional life. And then also, maybe I'm just like a trauma maven person, but I was thinking about the kind of early childhood experiences that Julia has.
Yeah, absolutely.
Her mother, Anita, who, as a Chicagoland person, and I don't know if you've been watching The Bear, but I started thinking of Anita as Jamie Lee Curtis from The Bear, because she's very non-maternal.
Yes, absolutely.
Demeanor. And so I was really interested in how the upbringing that Julia has, which I would characterize as a traumatic upbringing, braids through her early adulthood and then into her middle-aged adult life. Like, did you think about that as a sort of major theme, or was that something that came as part of developing her character?
I would certainly say it's a major theme now, but it wasn't at the outset. I don't think it was until there's a scene in this novel where Julia goes to meet her future husband's family for the first time. And he's from Wisconsin. He has this sort of like lovely Midwestern family who likes to spend holidays together. And the thing that Julia finds the most shocking about Mark is that his family is nice. Like, that is the thing that kind of blows her away. And it wasn't until that moment that I was like, hold on, why is this so strange to her? And I knew at that point that Julia was estranged from her mother. I knew that her father wasn't really in the picture. And I knew that she had some things that had happened in the past, but I hadn't done most of the legwork to look at what that was. And then when I started doing that, I kind of couldn't stop. And so that became the last, full third of the book, was kind of exploring what did it look like to be this woman as a 7-year-old with a mother who didn't really have the resources to be a mother, didn't really have the desire to be a mother. And I think that, that ended up being a really, really meaningful part of the book for me to explore, and of that character. And I think it's one too, from what I've been hearing from readers, it is the part of the book that people will be kind of reading this book and thinking like, Julia, stop. Like, why are you this way, Julia? And then they meet her as a little kid whose parents don't show up to things, or as, X, Y, or Z. And they kind of see where she's coming from, which I love. Like, I love moments like that as a reader. So it's really been exciting to hear that readers are having that experience with this book.
It is really resonant, and I found myself wondering about it as a writer-reader, if you know what I mean. And so I'm really gratified hearing about the sort of process of, I call it seeding in the backstory, where you're kind of writing your way happily along, and the character is just how the character is. The character is you, the character is herself, and she has a certain set of mannerisms and a certain set of actions. And all of a sudden you're like, well, wait, what is the background here? Right?
Yeah.
And that becomes something that's so compelling. Like, I was writing, I'm writing now a psychological suspense, and I'm writing right now from the point of view of a serial killer, obviously me.
Cool. Yeah.
I'm in a Zoom room every day with one of our producers who also is writing a thriller. And he was like, well, what's the serial killer's background? And at first I was like, I don't care. Who cares? He's just evil. Like, I don't want him to remember his background. It's shrouded in a mist because the implication is something so bad happened to him, he can't actually remember. And to speak, I was like, oh, this is what happened. And it actually is worse than something that you can't remember. And so the temptation is to kind of go off the forward moving path that I'm on and just write his whole backstory so I can go and backseat it later. Is that kind of what happened to you with Julia's backstory? Like, did you say, I just have to step off the forward narrative path for a moment and like really explore this relationship she has with her mom? Or did you kind of write it chronologically?
No, I didn't write any of this novel chronologically. So yeah, I was this way with my first book too. I would just sort of become upset, like what you're describing, become obsessed with something. Sometimes it's a thing that ends up in the novel and sometimes it's not. But with Julia's mom, I very much, she kept sort of popping up in different scenes or in different drafts or in Julia's interiority. And then I reached a point where I was like, all right, who is this woman? And then I had to kind of go on that serial killer. And Julia's mom is not a serial killer, but she's not particularly likable. And I did kind of have to, without writing a whole other novel about Anita, have to go into her backstory and give her some depth too. So she wasn't just a villain. And Julia's mom, readers don't like Julia's mom particularly. I kind of do. I don't think she's a good mom, and I don't think she's like a particularly great person, but I think that she's under-resourced and under-supported and someone who's kind of been, didn't have a lot of options in life and did try. So I love that. I love finding those, be it a serial killer or just someone's like kind of shitty mom, like figuring out, where they came from. Cause I think that, I don't know, that makes it more interesting for me and hopefully for readers. Yeah. If you can empathize with a serial killer, that has to be a interesting moment as a writer and a reader. Right?
Well, I mean, it's a little Humbert-y, right? I mean, there's something that's really bad, but it I guess for me, one of the reasons I love to read books about people's psychology, and I would very much classify Same as It Ever Was being about that, like how people are made, how their lives intersect with the sort of raw material that they are, and then how that carries on through different eras of their life. Like that's fascinating stuff. I love putting a puzzle together. And so for me, it's, I guess, less about creating empathy for somebody who's a serial killer than just kind of like figuring out in the big switchboard of human psychology, like where does this part fit in? Where does that part fit in? I don't know if you have this as a writer, but when those answers land on you, are you like, fuck, because you're like writing quite happily along and you're maybe halfway through the book and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, now there's this whole other side world that I have to explore? Or do you find that a luscious part of the process?
It probably depends on the day, I guess, or on my mood. I think in the case of Julia's mom, I was excited about it just because for me, it just meant an excuse to write more scenes and more conversations, which is the thing I love doing as a writer. I love it a little too much. And that's why I have so many hundreds of pages that I've just sort of thrown out. But I think in that case, it was exciting. But then sometimes it's like that thing that you've sort of maybe subconsciously been avoiding it. Like, that you're going to have to confront it at some point. And then your editor asks like a really good question. You're like, shit, like I was hoping I would notice that. Because I just, yeah. So it depends, but.
I'm going to ask all the process questions because I super love it, but I'm going to stick with that for one more second because I love that. I was getting kind of a non-warm and fuzzy feeling from Anita, and everybody blames the mom for everything, right? I mean, that's psychologically, that's the thing, but it did help me understand why Julia, as you said, so beautifully has trouble moving through the world in a way. Like, I didn't necessarily think this was a book about maternal ambivalence. I thought it was a book about normality ambivalence. Like, Julia does not ever envision herself as somebody who has a traditional life with a husband, and she ends up with a husband and two kids in the suburbs. And there's a line early on about how she's shocked at how lovely her life has turned out to be. She still thinks this, and she's almost 60. And I felt like maybe the early stuff with Anita kind of braided itself into her psyche in such a way where she was just like, I'm never going to have this. Do you think that she does kind of come to terms with being a normie, so to speak? Like,
yeah, I do think that she does. I think that her relationship with normalcy sort of evolves and changes. I think she sort of isn't aware of it as a child and then kind of starts to covet it. But then in her 20s decides like I can do whatever I want. I can, I don't have to follow the path that everyone else is following. And then she meets a really normal man and is sort of like, I kind of like this person, like maybe, and I think that without spoiling anything, I think that she does kind of come to the realization at the end that like everyone's normal and nobody's normal. And she's not unique. But she is. I mean, I think that was my big takeaway with this book. Is that there's no such thing as a boring person or a particularly interesting person. Yeah. What if we realize we're mediocre at best?
Yeah, we realize we're just normal people. Like we all like to think like, oh, we're destined for such huge things. And then maybe we're just destined for a lovely life. Like who knows?
Right.
I loved her relationship with her husband. And I actually was kind of jealous of it because I think such a steady Eddie. I don't know if somebody actually said that in the book or if I was just thinking it, but he's such a forgiving guy and a smart guy. We're having our Thoughtful Bro host, Mark Cecil, just popped on with a comment about he is not, but I am, and it's the truth. I think we're all that way. Can you talk a little bit about how Mark sort of gentles Julia into being in a traditional place in life that she never thought she would be into?
Yeah. I had fun with Mark. So I've been accused throughout my not very long career, but also particularly as a graduate student, of writing men who are too nice, which I don't know where that comes from because that has not been my like personal experience. It's not like I just like can't help but like continually date really nice men. That's not been my the way that I have moved.
But no serial killers yet. Hopefully.
I know.
Mark would like you to know he is nice. He is actually
Mark
is
very nice. Yeah.
That is true. And honestly, I have to say that IRL, I know a lot of women who have had backgrounds that are really tough or their family backgrounds are tough and they have marriages to these really nice guys. And I'm like, how did that happen? Because I had a background a little bit, a topsy-turvy. And then I always seek out the super charming, damaged people, like love them, so I was looking at Mark thinking, well, how did Julia get into this relationship? And if I had been with Mark, I would have been like, no, like you're like a toothpaste ad. Like I can't do it. Right. So how does this happen?
How does it happen? Yeah. I mean, I think, well, it's manyfold. I think that Mark is not as normal as that was one of the sort of challenges I posed to myself was how to kind of complexify Mark, how to make him not just like a dish rag, like nice guy who doesn't have any personality. And the way that I did that was, giving him his own complexities, one of which is falling in love with Julia. Like Julia is not the person he's quote unquote supposed to be with. Julia. Yeah. He's a lot more interesting than he's given credit for. And so I think, there's that scene I referenced. Oh, hi, thanks for coming to Omaha. That's so lovely. I really like that little dog in your picture too. This is what it's like to be out in public with me. I'm like, look, there's a golden retriever.
Squirrel, except it's dog.
Yeah. Exactly. But I think one of the things that I gave to sort of complexify Mark is his own insecurity, which we're all insecure in various ways. But Mark is someone who he is sort of buoyant and forward looking and optimistic. But he also feels unrecognized by his family of origin. He's got a great deal of anxiety. And so he and Julia, when they meet each other, are both kind of alone in this very particular way. And then they just are together. And then it becomes, the more entangled you get in someone else's life, the harder it becomes to disentangle yourself. And then they end up staying together through a lot of bad behavior on both ends, I guess. But yeah, without spoiling anything. But that was kind of my challenge was like, how do you take this man and make him more interesting, but also how do you take someone's niceness and turn that into a plot device?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it is in a way, because you think, oh, they're a little bit lopsided in terms of Julia's insistence on being Julia and being kind of prickly, I think, as a character. And Mark
Mhm.
is just like as smooth as vanilla ice cream, but he's also a person. And so you think, how are these people going to stay together, especially when there is bad behavior? And I'm happy to say, you guys, there's plenty of bad behavior in Same As It Ever Was. And
There's a lot. Yeah.
people who are well behaved, like very short books, very boring books. So like,
Exactly. Yeah.
that is a question of like, is this guy going to hit his breaking point or not? And so that's one of the mysteries that keeps pulling the reader through, I think, is are they going to make it? How are they going to make it? Despite sort of disparity in background, I would say, even more than temperament, I guess. So it's nice to see him being so resilient. Also understanding like he's not a pushover, like he's a really well shaded character.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm wondering, I'd love to talk about process. I was thinking about what you said before about never writing chronologically, which as a Container Store brain person is so terrifying to me. But I do start in a sort of mosaic when, hi Renee, I start in a kind of a mosaic where I will write something that seems the most pressing to me emotionally from a book, and then kind of build the book as a scaffolding around it, and then back out of it, do the chronology, and then write from an outline. How do you start your books? Like, do you start with language? Do you start with character? Do you start with a scene snippet? Like, let's start there with where you start.
That's a good question. It will typically, a character comes to me as a voice, I guess, but I'll typically have them in a particular setting. And I didn't actually, so Same As It Ever Was, I've been telling people I've been working on it for about 5 years, but I had this epiphany when I was in Chicago on book tour last month or the month before, that I actually wrote a short story about Julia almost 10 years ago. And it was about a young mother who is an insomniac who kind of becomes, it was a magical realist story, which is very much not my lane. So it's interesting that this very realist novel evolved from that. But I was, the dynamic between this woman and this older woman whose life she is coveting is the sort of thing from that story that stuck. And so there's a scene that does appear in Same As It Ever Was where Julia is in the Botanic Garden and she meets Helen Russo for the first time. She sees this woman who she's just kind of like very, very stricken by. And that's where this book started for me. And I think I couldn't tell you where my first book started. But yeah, for me, it tends to be put two people in a situation together. It can be, stick them in a car, just some exchange. And that is usually, and if I care about the characters enough, that's usually enough for me to kind of decide, are these people worth, hanging out with for maybe like a really long time.
A really long time. How long does it take you to write your books?
The most one we ever had took me about, I want to say 6 or 7 years. And I started, except for that one short story, I started writing the pages that became Same As It Ever Was when I was editing Most Fun. So about 5 years. So like 5 to 7 years. What about you?
That sounds about normal to me. I think this one, I was like, I'm going to write a thriller. It's going to go so much faster. I'll write it in 3 months because it's a thriller. Ha ha ha. No, of course, it's not turning out to be that way at all. But I usually write historical fiction, and so I have to research the F out of it.
Yeah.
Now I'm not doing that. I'm just drawing from my own fevered little brain. So that makes it a lot easier. Hopefully, maybe a year start to finish on this one. And then, I don't know, that sounds really fast. But it traditionally has been 5 to 10 years for everybody.
Okay.
So writers out there, because we get a lot of writers watching our Blaze interviews, listening to the podcast. If you feel like, oh my God, I've been working on the same book for 20 years. So did Margaret Mitchell. So did Harper Lee. They won book. Perfect. Yeah. Don't worry about it. It takes as long as it takes.
Yeah. Right? Donna Tartt is what, like a decade a book? We're owed a new Donna Tartt, I believe.
I think, yeah. I'm like, we're sitting here waiting.
I know.
That's so funny too. I remember like following up The Secret History must have been so terribly hard.
Yeah.
Do you feel, and this is such an obnoxious question in some ways, but I mean the quote sophomore novel, like the second novel, I think if you've had a success with your first novel, backing into that second novel can be hard. I had that sort of pattern because I got very lucky with my first novel, and then the next novel was like sort of excruciating.
Mm-hmm.
Tell people to write, hopefully not to read, but I always tell people that it was like my first novel, I was giving birth for like 10 years in a shack in the woods and like screaming, and there was nobody around to hear it, but then it came out and it was done.
Right.
The second novel, I had a team of expert obstetricians standing around me and again, like tapping their watches and being like, where is it? How's it going? And checking the heartbeat. Do you need an epidural? And that was a very different experience. So how was it following, having a bestseller right out of the gate, being a reading pick right out of the gate? Like how was that for, same as it ever was when you sat down at the desk in a t-shirt,
Yeah, it was challenging. It's sort of I guess it's a blessing and a curse. I think the biggest difference, and it's exactly what you're describing with a first book to a second book, is the first book, I was just having fun. I never thought anyone would read it. I wasn't even really writing with an eye toward getting it published for the first several years. And then when I found an age, like, and then I'm not being the sort of like, oh, it all just happened. Like it's hard work to write a book, but these things, it's also a convergence of, other things that are beyond your control. So I definitely, writing the second book, I had an audience suddenly, which is the greatest gift as a writer. It's incredible, but it was also like, oh God, like, and then there's also like that, like, oh, that mean lady at Kirkus said that shitty thing about me. And I think about her a lot, like, and so you're kind of haunted by, those things, which again are wonderful to have. It's wonderful to have, it's better to be, it's better to be reviewed badly than to not be reviewed at all or whatever. But these things are wonderful to have, and I know. I don't know if I agree with, but yeah, I think I felt a ton of pressure with the second book, and it was COVID. So I was just alone in my house with my dog for years. Whereas with The Most Fun We've Ever Had, I worked on a lot of it as a graduate student. So I had a mentor, I had a thesis advisor, I had, classmates, I had, people around me who were kind of doing the same thing. And this time it was just me and Renee, who is a wonderful writing partner. But she is, she has her own life.
She has her own interest. It's so funny because my dismount question was going to be the most important thing, which is, what does Renee think about all this? What does Renee think about the writing life? Like, that's a legit question, I feel.
Yeah, no, she's like the best companion. And I tell her when I'm working that I'm going to earn money to put in our salmon fund.
That's so great.
She respects that. But no, she's been great. And I think that dogs are sort of great little, like, she's completely passed out on the couch next to me. But she's like this nice little metronome. And I know that in a half hour, she's going to be like, all right, it's time to go in the yard for a little bit. Or, but yeah, I think so. With the second book, it was, I felt more like I was writing in a vacuum, and I knew or suspected that there would be that, well, she better, write the same book as she did the first time, or not write the same book as she did. Yeah. So
it's like, I guess, and I mean, I think about it from the reader's perspective, like the people who write the things I really love, I kind of hope they're going to write the same book over and over. Like I grew up with Sail the Plane, like the Jewish family sagas, which I totally loved, or like Anne Rivers Sidden, who I discovered a few years ago, who writes these like giant, she's kind of like the female Pat Conroy, right? And all the books are basically the same theme, the same topic. The descriptions are all different. Beautiful writing, like you're writing, like very descriptive, very evocative, very lush stuff, but kind of the same book. And I found that after the miraculous success of my first book, I had zero inclination to rewrite that book, which is such a bummer, because as a reader, I'd be like, can you please write another World War II book? And every time I did, I felt like I was reheating my leftovers in some way. Kind of like cannibalizing myself. And so I was like, I did this one already. Sorry, guys. So that second book is tough. Like I wrote something contemporary. Everybody hated it except for like 5 people, So, and then I went back to historical literature. Like it's all kind of like what moves you, I guess. Like do you see people stay in the family drama lane because both of your books are, I would qualify them both as family saga, family drama. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I don't know. I really like your dogs, Renee. Also, I love golden.
Many Renees, many dogs on
Yes.
It's like the theme of the call today is the
yes. I don't know. It's funny. I was like I have had I love mysteries, and so I'm really interested in that you've kind of I hate when people say pivot, but like pivoted to to work on a thriller. I love hearing that because I've had the thought before, like I love reading mysteries, or like, could I do that? But then you do feel this sense of like, well, people expect X, Y, or Z. So I don't know. I try to focus on character, and that's what I'm doing with my third book, which is, if you saw what exists of it, you would be like very afraid of me.
Why?
Just because it's very like if I were to send you the document, you would be like, this is not coherent. Because it's just something.
Aren't you still on tour for the second book? It's like, okay, you get to have a baby while you're still.
Oh, I'm not working on it now. Don't worry. I haven't written in months. No, I started writing the third book when I had like a panic time with my second book, when I was like, I just called my agent. We hadn't sold it yet. And I was like, I don't think, oh yeah, that's lovely. Where I was just sort of like, I don't think this book is working. And my agent said the thing that you don't want your agent to say, which is, fine, why don't you start something else? So I did. And then in doing that, I realized that I was still interested in Julia. And then I called Ellen, my agent, and I told her, and she said, I knew that would happen. I just wanted to give you permission to work on something else, which was lovely. It was a very like Yoda moment. But yeah, so I have those pages from,
Yeah.
Yeah.
You are. Yeah, that's really funny.
Yeah.
Is your agent Ellen Levine?
It is. She is, yes.
Levine is so great. She rejected me many, many years ago. I have utmost respect for her.
Oh, she's the best. She is like she's so good at her job. She is like, I have in my acknowledgments for Same as It Ever Was there, I can't remember them verbatim, but I literally have this moment at least once a week where I think I'm in a situation and I'm like, what would Ellen Levine do in this situation?
Oh, that's so great.
She's just so good at what she does. And I'm very lucky to have her.
She's a powerhouse. I love these conversations. This is like such a joy of my life, is getting to talk shop with other writers about how
likewise
like their writing life and how you navigate that. And I was thinking, or if you're already working on your third book and you're still on tour for this, I was like, are you one of those?
Oh, no, I'm not. Don't worry.
That sort of legend about, I forget which writer it was, maybe like Balzac or something, would finish a book in the morning and start another in the afternoon. And I was like, you mean reading one, right? Like not actually. Writers who do that. They're like, okay, I'm done with this. Now I'm going to write another one this afternoon. And I just think, well, what about a year out to promote though and go get Botox and things? Like, come on, like be out in the world a little bit. So
yeah.
But I'm excited to hear about the third one. Is it kind of, can you talk about it at all?
Not really, because I'm not really sure what it is, but there were just a few characters that I was interested in, and I put them in a town, and that like a small town, and then I kept finding new people. So that is of interest to me. I think it's more just kind of people moving around. I'm not entirely sure what connects them or what is going to be the thing, but that's kind of that's the fun part. Like that's the fun. It's the scary part and the fun part, I guess, the exploratory part of writing, when you're like, this is a person that I might want to spend the next 5 years with. So we'll see. I don't know.
I think that sounds like a really healthy way to go about it, because what I'll do instead is walk around scowling for like 5 years, trying to think of a story. And I'm like, is this the person? Is this the person? It's kind of like a combination lock in my head where I know I'm interested in a character, and then I'm trying out all the stories to fit that character.
Yeah.
And then eventually it all clicks together into the right combination, and then I sit down to write, and it's very fast. But like my writing is fast and my ideating is slow.
Interesting.
And like kind of test driving your characters and stories, I think sounds much more healthy. Although I will say, like my friend Mark, who was with us before, is always saying like your stuff comes out super clean, and I'm like, because I've been thinking about it for like 5 years. So we had a great reader question come in. I'm going to start popping some of these up. Like,
Sure.
where are your characters coming from? Like, what a great question, Renee.
That's a great question. I don't know. I don't know where they're coming from. I think I'm a big eavesdropper. COVID was challenging in that respect, that I wasn't just kind of moving through the world and listening to other people unethically, which is what I'm used to doing.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But I think I'll overhear a line of dialogue, or I'll overhear just some sans context, some weird piece of a conversation that's happening. Or I'll just see someone intriguing and start thinking like, all right, what are you doing in the thrift store right now? Or like, why did you order that weird coffee or whatever? And that is often enough to kind of get a character. Julia, who's the narrator of Same as It Ever Was, I'm trying to think. There's a line in the book pretty early on where Julia's talking to her friend, and she refers to her husband as Ben's dad instead of my husband, and her friend says, "Oh, are you divorced?" They're not friends yet. She doesn't know that. But Julia says, "What does divorced sound like?" And that was a really early line where I was like, this is sort of a defining line of dialogue for this character. And that was enough to kind of fuel me through many, many scenes with her. Because I think it revealed a lot about her insecurities and her neuroses, and also just what her life logistically looked like. So
I love that. And so how does this work? This is asking for a friend, hashtag, like you're kind of writing into your characters, and you said you have a lot of discarded pages. I also have a lot of discarded pages, even though I do work from a very stringent outline.
Yeah.
You know, things kind of go off the reservation, so outlines don't really matter that much except to soothe the writer who's working with one, I think. But but I always feel this tremendous sense of like time pressure, like I have to get this to my agent or I have to get it to an editor. Like right now, I have October 15th deadline for a book, and I'm like, oh my, of this year. As a writer friend to me said recently, of this year, I'm like, yeah. So I don't always feel like I have the permission to kind of play, and yet the books demand that you do that sort of exploratory thing. Like when you were talking about Julia's mom, Anita, like kind of going off on a side road and saying like, here's everything we need to know, or writing into Julia's character saying like, why would she ask this question?
Mm-hmm.
How do you handle that sort of nexus of industry demand and your own creative playfulness, I guess is the best way I would define it. Like, we just had a question that is germane to this. Do you feel like your writing suffers due to deadlines? Another great question.
Yeah. I guess I can answer those sort of in concert with each other, because I think my writing, I think, benefits from deadlines. I'm very much a person. I love being told what to do, and I love being told. I used to I've had my agent before give me fake deadlines, just so I feel like, well, so I will say my agent has been very good with both of my books about not selling them until I feel like they're ready. And by ready, I mean, I know I'm going to spend another year with my editor at Doubleday, working on the book, but like pushing them as far as I can by myself. So I think with my first book, I had a few moments of frustration where I was just like, I've been working on this for 5 years. Can we please just try to sell it? And my agent would be like, no, you don't want to do that. You don't want to sell a book before it's ready. You don't want to, and she's so right. And so I think it is a combination of doing that, pushing books as far as I can by myself, but also then having deadlines. My editor at Doubleday is really great at, I feel like we work really collaboratively together. And so she'll sort of be like, I'm going to take the book for the next 6 weeks, and then I'm going to give you notes, and you're going to have 2 months to work on. And I love that. I love being told you need to turn this in by September 27th or else, even though no one's going to do anything. I was like, Ellen, could you threaten me? And she's like, no.
I kind of feel like Ellen might threaten people. Like, we're coming from the other direction and just being like, I'll get it to you soon. And then, 17 years later, she might actually threaten you.
Yeah, I know. I have to figure out how how to make that work.
No, I love that. I think that every writer has a great team of people around him or her or them that understands the particular psychology of that writer. Like my agent will give me all the fake deadlines as well. And she's like, well, Jenna, I know you were my agent's French. She's like, well, you know, she didn't have a weird speech impediment. That is not her accent, but she'll be like, if I do not give you this deadline, I know that you will just go onto Facebook and go shopping. And, you know, she's not wrong. So if I'm like, okay, I have an idea, she will give me a deadline and say, I would like to see pages by X date, blah, blah, blah. But like once I have the actual official publisher deadline, I actually both like it and fear it because
me too.
It gives me a chance to shove everything else in my calendar aside.
Mm-hmm.
Really, really important to me because otherwise there are so many fun ways to be a writer without writing. And then I have to be like, no, I'm going to sit down and work. At the same time, I think, what if I do need to give my serial killer a family background and that takes me a week instead of an afternoon? And I have to remind myself that people are actually pretty lenient about nobody's going to come to my house and take away my TV because I didn't get it in a week before I was supposed to. But yeah, it sounds like you have a good symbiosis of sort of industry pressure and your own internal clockwork, which is.
We'll see. Yeah.
Sounds good to me. Do we have more audience questions? So I'm going to pop some of them on the screen. We got one from our thoughtful bro. Why do you think it's so hard for people to clearly examine their own lives? This one came in when we were talking about Julia and her relationship with her mom and then how that equalizes or doesn't into being a person with a sort of traditional life.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's funny. I think I kind of ran into this problem in real time writing this novel because my first novel had 7 narrative points of view. And having that flexibility, it sounds like it would be harder, but it's actually way easier because you have the flexibility to kind of step away from character X and look at them from a distance. And I wasn't doing that with Julia. And I think that is the same reason that people have a hard time kind of looking at themselves head on. We're just too close to our own lives and we can't have perspective on them ever. I mean, I think sometimes we can have some perspective, but I think it's much harder to look at your own life honestly, look at your own life head on because you're living it. I mean, and I think, so I worked as a social worker prior to writing The Most Fun We Ever Had. And I think one of the most freeing things for the people that I worked with and me as like in therapy that I have done in my life is sometimes just articulating the story of your own life. Because most of us aren't ever prompted to do that to an objective third party. And it's hard. And it often takes, that's why people are in therapy for years and years, because it's not something you can just do once and then you got it out of your system. It often takes a long time to kind of make sense of your own narrative. And so I think that's part of it, is that we're pressed too closely against ourselves or our own heads to really see what's going on in there. I don't know. That's my 2 cents on
Great answer. And as you're saying that, I'm thinking about how it's so easy to look at other people and like make suggestions about their lives or judge their lives or whatever, kind of make a sketch of somebody who you think they are. That's like writing from the point of view of somebody else. If you're writing from the point of view of yourself, you can keep pulling these, spiritual and psychological rabbits out of the hat forever. And you drill down and you're like, and then that thing happened when I was 2. And you're like, oh my God. It's never ending. I think you know yourself much less. That was a great, great answer.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah. Ellen has asked, I love the idea of creating characters you want to hang out with, but what if your protagonist is nasty?
That's a good question. Well, I want to hear about your serial. Can you talk to us about hanging out with a serial killer? Like what is?
I love it. I mean, I think it's great. I think it's partly because of what we were just saying, which is why I think it's a great follow-up question. The characters who are most like me are the ones I find the least interesting and the kind of most sticky to write. The ones who are not like me, and I also have not killed anybody recently or, in this lifetime.
Sure. No judgment. Yeah.
No judgment. Right. Exactly. The person is, bad road rage. Got to get rid of them. But there's something that is very liberating about stepping into the mindset of the person who does the things that you would never do as a person. Like I
Mhm.
strive to not even be an unkind person, let alone grooming people to kill them, you know? So
Yeah.
to really like get in somebody else's head and then take the gloves off psychically and just think, oh my God, this person is a total freaking lunatic.
Mhm.
It's great. I find it like super liberating. And I think that's what fiction is. Do you agree? Like it's partly an act of imaginative empathy, but it's also a way of leaping out of your own
Yes.
claustrophobic experience to be in somebody else's.
Absolutely. No, I think my experience with both of my books has been readers will tell me some readers don't like Julia in my first book. Many readers didn't like Violet or Wendy. And those were the characters who I probably related to the least, but had the most fun writing because they get to say the things that you yourself wouldn't say or make the decisions that you yourself wouldn't make. And it's a lot of fun. Like
Exactly.
yeah.
Like,
So
no, don't do that, right? You know, and I'm writing,
right.
oh my God. I also find the awful characters to be really funny most of the time. Like my first book
Me
had
too.
a Nazi in it who was also had a very fragile ego and but was like really brutal. And a lot of the scenes when I was writing him, I mean, it depended on the scene, but like there's one scene where he shows up in paisley pajamas and I almost died writing that scene because I thought it was so funny. It just, there's something about, there's also something about the awful characters not realizing they're awful
Mm-hmm.
that I think is
Totally.
really amusing. So,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But somebody who I was just reading my serial killer to aloud this past weekend is like, it's like being covered with a really sticky, awful lube that you can't get off. And I'm like, perfect. I expect readers to despise this character and they
Yeah.
should because he's a serial killer. But at the same time, like, I hope they're kind of stuck to him in a way that they can't put down, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What is this person going to do next? Why is he even doing this? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
It's fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, super fun. Super fun to write killers. I have time for one more question from Sylvia. I asked Claire this in person. I love the answer. While the first book had us asking how your family felt, how did your friends view this one? i.e., is that me? Especially because you eavesdrop on people in Iowa City. Like, I'm going to be careful ordering coffee there from now on.
I know. Yeah, that's a good question. I can't remember how I've answered it in the past. I definitely have had more than one of my friends say, like, how many hundreds of hours of my phone calls have you been tapping over the last few years? I think particularly as it pertains to Julia's experience with early motherhood. Julia is not particularly enjoying parenthood in a way that I don't think is unusual. But I think that she says the things that you're not supposed to say, which is like, I really love my kid, but sometimes I wish he weren't around. Not that he was like dead, but like that he was at someone else's house for a couple days or like, and so that has definitely been, and I love hearing that from my friends and from readers too, women who are sort of like, I felt this way. I just didn't feel like I was allowed to say that I felt that way. And I love to hear that because I don't feel like we should have things that we're not allowed to say necessarily. I mean, certain things that we're not allowed to say, but things about our feelings that we aren't allowed to express. So that was one thing. I haven't had any sort of like one-to-one, like that person seems a lot like X. Well, there have been a few amusing. I don't know if this has happened to you. People are not good at, if any occasion, if I've actually ever like taken a trait from a person, it's usually an unfavorable trait. That person's never going to be like, oh, that really annoying person is me. But someone might be like, oh, that really like put together accomplished person kind of reminds me of myself.
And you're like, that's so right. That's totally you.
Right? Yeah. Yes. You did a great job. So yeah, I think that has been one thing. That I think it's a risky run being friends with a writer, I guess. I try not to consciously take anything from my actual like firsthand conversations, but
it is. I mean, I was like going on Match.com dates in like 2002. My friends made up fake business cards for me that said anything you say may be used against you and put in a book because you're dating a writer. And I always think, yeah, I should hand those out and people will think they're funny, ha ha ha. But but I think we have kind of sticky brains. Like there is something about the writers taking their actual experience and putting it to the Play-Doh factory of their brains, and then it comes out in a different way.
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I do that with people, certainly. Like, I'll like meet someone and be like, I have got you figured out, and I'm going to take pieces A, B, and C of your 7,000 pieces and use them to, yeah.
Yep, that's totally right. Like little bits and pieces here and there. Or sometimes when I write my main characters, each character has an essence, like a personality trait.
Yeah.
This person is accountability. This person is bravery. This person is, evil. This person is whatever, morally bankrupt. And then those people tend not to be, those are like demonstrations of what those qualities are, but a lot of little pieces of other people might be grafted on, or we can't help it, you guys. Our brains are vacuums. And do you get to a certain point in your books where everything becomes, it's like, the opposite of a leaf blower, like everything gets sucked in when the machine is really hot, and becomes something in the book? Like, I have to use that, I have to use that, I have to use that, or no?
I think so. I mean, I distinctly remember I'm a big walker, and that's a weird thing to say, but I go for a lot of walks. That's like a big part of my writing process, is not writing, I guess. But like you said, a lot of the work of writing is just like working through stuff in your head. And I definitely went through a phase. It was probably 2 summers ago I'm pointing at my desk with Same as It Ever Was. Where I remember just walking around and being like, that lawn sign is mine, like that's mine, that weird street name is mine, the pants that person is wearing, and so, yeah, I think sometimes my brain is just more active than others. And sometimes I'm just completely oblivious. I guess it depends on. Yeah.
It might depend on the stage of the book. Maybe totally. There are certain stages, like when the writing machine is super hot, and it's usually toward the end of a book where I'm kind of slaloming downhill. I remember walking across the Boston Common once to go teach a class, and I was like, oh my God, those cherry trees and the way the sun is in the cherry trees at the top of it, like everything sucked into the moss. So I aspire. I literally could talk to you about writing all day. We've kept you for an hour.
This is a delight. You are delightful. Yeah.
Same. And I wanted to ask about Prairie Lights. So let me ask that as a quick question.
Yeah.
Guys, when you're in Iowa City, Claire works at Prairie Lights, which is
an
amazing bookstore. Everybody should know they import all of these great writers to Iowa City, and also the writers who live there. So how does that, working as a bookseller in this phenomenal, very renowned store, intersect with your writing?
Yeah. So I started working at Prairie Lights almost 2 years ago, and it was kind of the way that I reacquainted myself with the world post-COVID, because it was just such a gentle space to kind of crawl out into. And it was a way to, I guess, interact with the world of books and the world of publishing that isn't being in the machine. Like, I don't tell customers that I'm a writer, generally speaking. We were masked for the first year that I worked there. So it wasn't like anyone, not people don't recognize me anyway, but it's people wouldn't be like, oh, I see your picture on the back of your book and now you're at the desk. So there was an anonymity, and just the thing that got me into writing in the first place, which is just my love of books and stories. And so I think being able to go into a space where I wasn't talking about myself and I wasn't promoting my own books, but instead being like, oh my God, have you read this? Or let's talk about Louise Penny, or let's talk about, whatever. And just getting to be purely agendalessly excited about that has just been really lovely. And like you said, Iowa City is a really lovely literary community. We have great customers with really interesting brains. And so it's just been a really fun, lovely space to spend time in. So yeah, highly recommend working in a bookstore if you're a writer. I work there very, very, very short shifts, but it's a nice way to immerse yourself in the world a little bit.
That is super encouraging. Thank you for saying that, because we have a couple of really good books. We have many good indie bookstores in Boston, and there are a couple of walking distance. And I'm like, I'm just going to go throw myself into your store I was a bookseller at a Borders bookstore for a while when I lived in Boston, which I loved. And I did not put them out of business, I swear.
Yeah. That was something else. Yeah.
But although when the Oprah books came in, they would come in a flatbed truck, because there were so many of the Oprah pick, and it was never announced before the books came. So the truck would come unload this flatbed on the loading dock, and then we would know, and only then, what the book was for that month. It was And I was aspiring then, and I hadn't gone to grad school yet. And my general manager was like, I guess the Oprah book came today because I'd be so mad. I'd be like, look at this, like 1,000 books, and I'm still not even in grad school. Why? You know, envy, but hopefully, you know, I'm not quite that evil anymore. Okay, we have many more questions. You guys were so wonderful to like keep us company today and hang out in our talk. I know there are more questions. You can probably write to Claire, I imagine. Like,
yeah,
share her website, find her on social. We're all on there. We're all permeable. You should buy at least 5 or 6 copies of Same as It Ever Was.
It's a good number.
You know, or you know, yeah, for at least for yourself and for other people. For the summer, for the fall, for the winter. Holidays are coming, so Claire, thank you so much for being with us today and for showing us today.
Jenna.
The joy, the total joy.
It was a delight. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh. And thank you everybody for bringing your cute dogs.
Yes, Sue, your dog is very good. Yeah.
Dogs are so cute, right? We will see you next time on The Blaze. Thank you. Happy reading.
Thanks, everyone.